Religious freedom. President Trump signs an executive order granting relief for groups with religious objections to Obamacare. Healthcare repeal. The House votes on a bill to repeal Obamacare, a key campaign promise for President Trump. And the faithful traveler. We speak to Diana von Glahn about the apparitions in Fatima as the Pope prepares for his trip there next weekend. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, May 4th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We're following three big stories. Jason Calvi will tell us about the historic vote to replace Obamacare, and Wyatt Goolsbee is covering the new executive order protecting religious liberty. First, it's official. President Donald Trump will meet with Pope Francis at the Vatican later this month. The White House announced the president's first foreign trip today. It includes stops in Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Vatican. The Holy See press office confirms a May 24th meeting between the Holy Father and President Trump. He'll also meet with the Pope's Secretary of State and Secretary for Relations with States. President Trump is vowing to end government attacks on religious liberty, signing a new executive order the president says will make sure Americans are not forced to violate their strongly held religious beliefs. He also made a promise to the Little Sisters of the Poor. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee was there and joins us from the White House. Good evening, Wyatt.
Lauren, good evening. After nearly 5 years and numerous court battles, President Trump tells the Little Sisters of the Poor, your ordeal will soon be over. The president says the sisters and other groups have been pressured for too long to violate their conscience.
President Trump marks the National Day of Prayer with a boost to religious freedom.
We will not allow people of faith to be targeted, bullied, or silenced anymore.
The order promises relief for groups with religious objections to the Health and Human Services mandate in Obamacare. That mandate requires employers like the Little Sisters of the Poor to cover birth control and abortion-inducing drugs.
Incredible nuns who care for the sick, the elderly, and the forgotten.
President Trump inviting the sisters up on stage and vowing to protect their conscience rights.
No American should be forced to choose between the dictates of the federal government and the tenets of their faith.
That gives Cardinal Donald Worrell, Archbishop of Washington, a reason to be optimistic.
This executive order has to do not only with individual freedom, but institutional freedom. The freedom of a church to determine what constitutes its mission, its ministry.
The order also asked the IRS to cut back on enforcing the Johnson Amendment. It bars churches and tax-exempt groups from endorsing political candidates. The Faith and Freedom Coalition, which represents conservative Christians, welcomes the move.
This executive order itself is going to alleviate a lot of pressure and potential threats against faith-based, certainly churches themselves, but other faith-based organizations.
But the order isn't pleasing all conservative groups. The Alliance Defending Freedom, a Christian law firm, says the order doesn't do enough to defend religious freedom. They call Trump's pledge too vague. Lauren?
Wyatt, we should also mention that EWTN was involved in suing the Department of Health and Human Services as well. Now, are there any specifics about the relief the president is talking about for groups who say the HHS mandate violates their conscience?
Well, we know President Trump says this executive order instructs the IRS not to unfairly target churches and religious organizations for political speech, saying, quote, no one should be censoring sermons or targeting pastors. The order also states that the Attorney General should issue guidance interpreting religious liberty protections in federal law. Now, many details as to what this means and how it will play out is still to come. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsbee reporting at the White House. Thank you, Wyatt. Several Catholic leaders came to the Rose Garden to witness President Trump sign the religious liberty order, including the president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, and lay Catholic leaders were present as well. Joining us now is Brian Birch, the president of CatholicVote.org, a Chicago-based nonprofit political advocacy group. Brian, welcome to the program.
Great to be here on this great day.
You were there today when the president signed the executive order granting relief for groups with religious objections to the HHS mandate. What was the mood there?
The mood was very vibrant, very encouraging. There was people of all religious faiths there. I think I would describe it as an event for all people of faith with a special Catholic flavor.
I saw the Little Sisters of the Poor were actually brought up there. Are you satisfied with the order? Does it go far enough to protect people of faith?
I think the order is a start. Obviously, there's some things that we would have preferred that the order included, but I think it's a very important first step in the resetting of the deck on religious liberty.
What else would you have liked to see the president or the administration do?
Well, ultimately, we'd like to see a law passed by Congress and signed by the president that makes protections for all people of faith, whether you're a private business or whether you're a religious charity. This includes the First Amendment Defense Act, a law that the president, as a candidate, pledged to sign. So this is a first step. Obviously, an executive order is limited in scope, but it resets the deck on where I think this president intends to take his leadership in protecting this foundational liberty.
Well, when you say it's limited in scope, does this mean on Sunday a priest can walk into the pulpit and say, vote for so-and-so? Is that still going to be a problem with the IRS?
Well, I think that's yet to be determined. I think the president signaled that he is going to direct the Department of Justice to be discretionary in how they prosecute that. I would say that the priests, pastors, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, can certainly begin to speak much more openly about politics, about candidates, and yes, I think even express voting preferences. There's nothing, I think, contradictory about being a religious organization or a church and expressing your First Amendment right when it comes to political matters.
So this covers two things, covers the Johnson Amendment and also covers what we're talking about with the Little Sisters of the Poor. You saw them coming up. You saw how excited they were. Did you get a chance to talk to them?
I did. I spoke with them. I made sure I took a picture with them. They were very excited. You could tell they were very thankful to the president and to the vice president for ending this ordeal of theirs. It took many, many years of unnecessary dollars and litigation, not just for Little Sisters, for Notre Dame, for EWTN, for many, many charities.
That's right. Well, I noticed that they even got a shout out to their lawyer. That doesn't happen very often. Lawyers are usually down on the totem pole.
That's right. The lawyers are the unsung heroes, but they're still very important to the ones that keep this going.
It is. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. Brian Birch, president of CatholicVote.org.
Thank you.
Republicans celebrate making good on their campaign promise to revise Obamacare and defund Planned Parenthood. It comes after a historic House vote. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reports. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The showdown vote razor close, just 4 votes separating the yeas from the nays after 20 Republicans vote against their party's bill. But it's still a big win for the GOP, and they rush to the White House to celebrate.
This is a great plan. I actually think it will get even better. And this is, make no mistake, this is a repeal and a replace of Obamacare. Make no mistake about it.
Vice President Pence calls it the biggest step yet toward dismantling Obamacare.
The ayes are 217, the nays are 213. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Today's vote of approval comes 6 weeks after Speaker Paul Ryan yanked the original health care bill.
So this is a victory for the president and the American people today.
House Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows and other conservatives were against the original GOP plan. So, what made the difference?
There's been a lot of meetings, a lot of negotiating, and a lot of working together.
And presidential negotiations.
He was very encouraging. He was willing to help me.
But today, no Democrats were convinced to back the bill.
Well, you know, if the last one was Frankenstein, this one is Dracula.
The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimated the earlier GOP bill would lead 24 million people losing health coverage in a decade. But so far, there's no revised report. We do know the Republican health care bill will allow children to stay on their parents' health care plans until age 26, get rid of Obamacare's tax penalties for people who don't have health insurance, transform Obama's insurance subsidies into tax credits that rise with the person's age, and the bill also defunds Planned Parenthood's federal Medicaid funds for 1 year.
We worked hard to achieve that, and I am very pleased the language is in the bill and look forward to being able to renew it in years to come.
From in the House, the bill now heads over to the Senate, where it's likely to undergo big changes. President Trump says he's confident it will get through that chamber. And Lauren, the congressmen all head home for a week break, where you can bet all of them, whether Democrats or Republicans, will be hearing praise and condemnation.
Jason Calby on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. The Senate approves a bipartisan spending bill, which now goes to President Trump for his signature. The $1.1 trillion measure funds the government through September. Republicans put off a fight with Democrats over the border wall and spending cuts. Buckingham Palace makes a big announcement. Prince Philip plans to retire from his royal duties this fall. The 95-year-old Duke of Edinburgh made the decision with the support of Queen Elizabeth. He'll no longer accept new invitations for visits, but could still appear at events from time to time. The prince has suffered from heart disease and other ailments in recent years, but has maintained a vigorous public schedule. The numbers are staggering. Since his wife became queen in 1952, Prince Philip has logged over 22,000 solo engagements and given more than 5,000 speeches. He's been involved in 700 charities at least and authored 14 books. The Vatican and the Asian nation of Myanmar agreed to establish diplomatic relations. The announcement comes on the same day the Holy Father met with the Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi, who is Myanmar's top civilian leader. The Buddhist majority country is transitioning from decades of military rule, but is facing criticism for religious and ethnic discrimination. Imagine reading the Bible cover to cover in 4 days. It took a team of volunteers to complete the mission this week in front of the U.S. Capitol.
Then the rich man said, "Please, Father Abraham, send him to my father's home."
Organizers of the U.S. Capitol Bible Reading Marathon want Christians to unify around Christ and the Bible.
We're praying for our country. There's great division in our country, great fear in our country, but we love God. All of us who are Christians love God, and we just want to challenge people to have a stronger devotional walk with the Lord by going to church and reading their Bible.
This is the 28th year for the Bible Marathon. It was time to end on this National Day of Prayer. Joining us now is the chairman of the National Day of Prayer, Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. Welcome to the program.
Always great to be with you.
President Obama didn't host White House events or personally participate in the National Day of Prayer. In contrast, President Trump is hosting Catholic cardinals, other religious leaders at the White House, signing an executive order on religious liberty, and you have been such a big supporter of religious freedom. What difference does it make to have support from the president on this issue?
Makes a tremendous difference. During the Obama White House, there were a lot of questions from any person or any group that was a nonprofit or a business that was faith-based at all, whether they could do business with the government, whether they can engage in educational institutions, whether they were welcome in America. Because quite frankly, there was lip service given over and over again about people of all faiths and of all perspectives. But when you actually got down to actual practice, if you were a person of faith, you were excluded from American life. So the eagerness now is for the White House to be able to step out and make a clear executive order to be able to say that every person, regardless of background, of faith or no faith, is welcome in America, and all opinions are valuable and are honored, especially in a day like the National Day of Prayer. It's exceptionally important that we get a clear, lengthy executive action to be able to detail all the different aspects and all the agencies that's needed for protection of religious liberty.
You have been very vocal about Christian persecution around the world. I was just in Iraq last month, and what Christians in Iraq need is money to rebuild their towns that were destroyed by ISIS. Will you push for aid from Congress for those Christians?
Yeah, the Obama administration and Secretary Kerry, when he's leading this as Secretary of State, made the designation of genocide. That is a very rare designation for the United States and for the world to be able to look at a particular group of people and say these are victims of genocide. They specifically targeted those in Iraq and in Syria under ISIS rule that were Christians, that were Yazidis, or that were Shias, saying these individuals are being targeted specifically because of their faith for execution and persecution. The problem was they made the genocide designation and then they didn't back it up with any actions. We didn't increase anything on our targeting for refugees, for instance, to be able to move refugees specifically from those communities into the United States or for additional targeted aid. And so we have already asked the Trump administration to be able to look at this genocide designation and determine what are we going to do as Americans if we know these individuals are being killed specifically because of their faith. As a nation that has a high priority for freedom of the free exercise of religion, what are we going to do about that? And we're continuing to be able to push them on that exact issue.
Thank you so much for joining us, Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma.
Thank you. Always glad to be with you.
Coming up, the battle against abortion.
Life is winning in America.
Vice President Mike Pence heralds a new era in government. And Congressman Francis Rooney joins me for a one-on-one interview.
I think this was a great week for Pope Francis.
His thoughts on the Catholic Church making a difference around the world. Vice President Mike Pence praises the Trump administration's progress on pro-life issues. Last night, he said it marks the beginning of a new era.
Life is winning in America. Even before day one of this administration, President Trump has also been keeping his promises to stand for life. The president knows that personnel is policy. That's why he's literally filled this White House and federal agencies with pro-life leaders.
The vice president addressed hundreds of people, including a team from EWTN, at the 10th Campaign for Life Gala, held by the pro-life group Susan B. Anthony List. Florida Congressman Francis Rooney and I sat down earlier today for a wide-ranging conversation. He previously served as ambassador to the Holy See during the George W. Bush administration. I asked the congressman what today's executive order on religious liberty is going to accomplish.
Well, I'm really excited that the president's going to tackle the Johnson Amendment, which wasn't ever meant to restrict religious leaders speaking out about politics. It was meant Johnson some cheap trick for his re-election in Texas, but it's been misconstrued. And hopefully we'll get that out of the way so that our religious voices can be heard in the public sphere.
You wrote today in Real Clear Politics that free expression of religion allows pluralistic religion organizations to exist within modern secular state and can ease ideological conflicts. This has been going on for a long time, this attempt. Why now would it be any different than the past?
Well, we'll have one more set of voices that are calling for civility and fundamental moral principles as guides to help people live good individual lives as well as good civic lives. You know, religiosity correlates so clearly and positively with good civic behaviors. You can check the book American Grace, where they have a lot of sociological statistics in there about religiosity and regular church attendance correlating with good families, civic involvement, political activism, all the fundamental values that we need to drive our country forward.
But how can promoting religious freedom help curb terror in the name of religion?
Well, you know, as the religion minister of Jordan said a couple of years ago, you can't fight an idea. We need to apply cultural and soft power diplomacy to couple with hard power to end Islamic terrorism. And I think religion has a strong role to play in reforming Islam, as Pope Benedict called for in Regensburg, to find the Islamic faith, Muslim faith, find a way forward in the 21st century the way that the Christian faiths have found their way forward in years past.
But yet we're still seeing in Egypt, there were 2 bombings by ISIS. There was a bombing in 2011 of the cathedral. This soft power approach, as you call it, over the years still does not seem to be working. How is that going to change?
Well, I think we're in the early innings of a long-term struggle with Islamic terrorism. There's too many criminals that have a vested interest in committing murder and mayhem, like the Alexandria Cathedral. It's not by coincidence that back in 2011 they did it while the Pope was giving his peace message. And so gradually I'm optimistic that as more and more moderate Muslims and Muslim scholars speak up, there will become a construction of Islam that the great bulk of Muslims, secular Muslims, like the ones we see in Indonesia and Malaysia, we used to see in West Africa till Boko Haram, you know, that they will say, wait, this is a religion, not a culture of death.
You saw from your perch as the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See under George W. Bush, the ways in which this soft power could work. Specifically, Can you give us an example of the ways in which the Holy See has been able to turn the tables a bit? I know the Pope just met with President El-Sisi in Egypt.
Yeah, I think this was a great week for Pope Francis. He got on some fundamental areas where the Holy See has shown it can improve the world in dealing with the radical Islamic terrorism, as Pope Benedict did. In fact, I think one of the news articles said this is the Regensburg for Pope Francis, which I think was a great comment. As George Weigel had said, Regensburg will someday go down as one of the leading turning points in the fight against Islamic terror, where the Pope called out radical Islamic terrorists as the criminals that they are, rather than trying to appease them and keep their head down like everyone did after those cartoons in Denmark.
Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Rooney, Francis Rooney of Florida.
Thank you for having me on.
Up next, the excitement surrounding an American priest who just moved a step closer to sainthood. And celebrating the 100th anniversary of Fatima, the faithful traveler tells us what makes the holy site so unique. Pope Francis advances the causes of 12 individuals on their way to sainthood, including one American. Father Solanus Casey was born in Wisconsin and spent much of his priestly life in Detroit, working with the poor and suffering as a Capuchin Franciscan. He co-founded the Capuchin Soup Kitchen in Detroit in 1929, which serves up to 2,000 meals a day. Today, Detroit's Archbishop Alan Vigneron spoke at a press conference and called Father Solanus an inspiration to all Catholics.
Give thanks to God ahead of time for all the ways through Father Solanus' intercession that we will be renewed in our care for the poor in proclaiming the good news of the mercy of Jesus Christ.
The cause for sainthood for Father Solanus started in 1966, 9 years after his death. Pope John Paul II declared him venerable in 1995. A special Mass will be held in the Archdiocese of Detroit later this year for his beatification after a woman's skin disease was healed through his intercession. One more miracle is needed before Father Solanus can be declared a saint. Pope Francis is traveling to Portugal next weekend to mark the 100th anniversary of apparitions of the Virgin Mary in Fatima. During the trip, the Holy Father will declare 2 of the visionaries saints, and that's expected to draw a crowd of 1 million people. Since the apparitions in 1917, countless pilgrims have made their way to pray at the holy site. Diana von Glahn, host of The Faithful Traveler, seen here on EWTN, joins us from Rome for more on the faith behind this sacred destination. Diana, you were just in Fatima and on your way home to the U.S. You explored so many of these sacred places. What makes Fatima unique?
Well, Fatima is special to me because I grew up with the stories of the 3 pastorinhos. And it's special, I think, because the pastorinhos, the little saints, the little pilgrims are so young. I think they remind us that our guide to holiness, our way to holiness is possible even at a very young age. So I think that's one of the great things. Their sacrifices that they made for sinners can inspire all of us, I think, and show us that even young kids can do things to grow in holiness.
What was it like on the ground as they're getting ready for Pope Francis's arrival?
Well, we were there, like you said, just last week, and everybody is excited, and they're a little nervous, I think, as every city is before the Holy Father comes to visit. But they're really excited to show Fatima to the world. They're also hopeful that pilgrims will come after this centenary. You know, Fatima is always eager to welcome pilgrims, and so for any of the pilgrims back home that won't be able to make it this year, definitely keep it in mind for 2018 in the future, because Fatima will be there and they'll be waiting for you.
Well, the events happened, as you said, 100 years ago. Why do you think they are still so important today?
You know, the Blessed Mother is always saying the same thing to us whenever we read what she says in the Bible, or when we hear her in apparitions. She always says the same thing: do what he tells you. And at Fatima, she basically says 3 things to us: pray the rosary every day, make reparations for sinners, and, you know, try to improve our own lives as well, stop sinning ourselves. Those 3 messages were relevant 100 years ago, and they're relevant today, 100 years later, and they're going to be relevant in another 100 years. Every day they're relevant. So I think that's the great thing is, you know, pray the rosary, make reparations for sins, and stop sinning.
Okay, Diana von Glahn. The Faithful Traveler right here on EWTN. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Don't forget, follow us on Facebook and Twitter and on YouTube. Good night, and God bless.